So welcome again to another lecture video about the principles of system. So for today we will be talking about cybernetics and uh, how we view cybernetics as a whole. We are done with the principles of science and approaches, no? And last time we discussed the relationship of science to the system thinking uh, course or curriculum. So for today, we will be talking about cybernetics, and in here we will be defining what is the so-called cybernetics function of such, and how can we apply this term, no, our course in our lives. So in a nutshell, when we say cybernetics, it is a study of information and processing, feedback, and control of communication system. Um, it is safe to say that cybernetics is the study of communication. We learned last semester in our purposive communication and business communication class, no, that we have this so-called communication cycle, and for the communication cycle to be effective, occur properly, we have this feedback and channel uh, noise, no, that are very important in the communication cycle. And during the time, we learned that there are two kinds of communication cycle. We have one-way communication cycle and the two-way communication cycle, which we discussed now from the theory of Shannon and Weaver. And we've learned that in order to have a successful communication process, there should be a feedback from the receiver for the communication cycle term. No? When we talk about one-way communication, feedback is not really that important because your goal is to simply send the information to the receiver. No? That's one-way communication. But unlike two-way communication cycle process, the receiver and the sender must have their feedback to the message that was being sent. Okay, so the idea of cybernetics is that it is the process of information dissemination through the use of technology as a whole. Whether you use microphones, you use computers, laptops, and even telephones, no? As long as you are using a medium that was based in technological advancement, cybernetic first, no? So the goal of cybernetics is to is to transfer information or to reduce the uncertainties. When we talk about reducing uncertainties, we have discussed this also in business communication, that reducing uncertainties means reducing the noise. When we reduce the noise, we make sure that the message was carefully being sent to the receiver, no? Or the audience. No? Reduction of uncertainty means the less predictable the message is, the more information that it carries, or um, it must be reliable, and the information will become clear and clearer if there is a so-called reduction of uncertainty, because uncertainty is inevitable, and well, it is a phenomenon we cannot control. Those are external and internal noises occur, no? For example, internet signals, no? The intermittent signals that we are facing, thunderstorms, heavy rains, no? Those are noises or uncertainties in communication cycles in the cybernetics breakdown. No? So noise is the enemy of information because it interrupts the information carrying capacity of the channel between the transmitter and the receiver. That's according to Griffin, 2008, in his book in page 43 to 44. So who coined the name cybernetics? It was originally from Norbert Wiener, in 1947. And he referred to cybernetics as control in communication because during the time, communication is very essential in the discovery of technology. So that's the reason why this cybernetics was coined during the time. It stems from the Greek term for steerman, the Latin word for governor. Simply put, cybernetics is the study of information, processes, feedback, and the control of communication. Okay, so a successful control in communication and with the help of different channels and medium, cybernetics occur. Now, in the establishment of this word cybernetics, there are influencers who are very popular during that time. And one of the major influence to cybernetics was Claude Shannon, which is the proponent of Shannon and waiver communication theory. He's a famous mathematician during his time, research scientist for Bell Telephone Company, who worked as a researcher in Alexander Graham Bell company in the establishment of telephones. He controls the signals and can distort a message during the time, and he was the first formally established cyberneticist, uh, or the professor studied the processing of information. Okay, so remember the name Claude Shannon. Okay, the cybernetic tradition relies heavily on mathematical theory of communication by, of course, Shannon in 1963. No? The cybernetic tradition and the mathematical theory of communication are virtually interchangeable as the tradition relies heavily on the theory of Shannon. Three is the magic number because there are three main components of the so-called cybernetics. The first one is the goal or the message is to be conveyed. Now the primary goal of cybernetics is to send a message, and not just simply send a message, but its goal is to convey an information and must be able to have a sense. The message must have a sense, or sensibility, or sensical thoughts, in order for the receiver or the audience to give a certain feedback, because the goal or the message must be conveyed. That's one goal of the cybernetics. The difference between the goal and what was actually conveyed are the things that they are trying to accomplish. Because the difference between the two-way communication and one-way communication is to number one, simply convey a message, but there's no accurate feedback. And the other one is to convey information, and there must be a feedback from the message. And number three is the feedback that is the most important one, which is sometimes equated with the word essential communication, because feedback or essential communication or effective communication must contain feedback itself. So feedback indicates to the source what is happening at the receivers end, so that we can see if the receiver agrees or disagrees to the message, or if the message was clearly received by the receiver or the audience. So what is the goal? No? The end goal of Shannon's model is to increase the amount of information that is successfully transmitted from the information source to the destination. By the means of what? By the means of media or channel, like the use of technology. No? That's the reason why when we talk in the telephone, cybernetics occur. When we use laptops or cell phones or even smartphones, cybernetics occur already. As long as the uncertainty was reduced or the noise was being cut from the equation. Here is the classic diagram of Shannon and Weber theory of communication that we have discussed during our business communication and course. Now, the children's game telephone is a good example of how cybernetics was being introduced during that time. Person begins with a message and tells their neighbor who tells their neighbor, and it goes on and on. No? Along the way, the message is subject to noise and changes the person from person to person. The last person to receive the message or the destination says aloud what message they receive. Usually, we are using this pass the message as our icebreaker in some of activities that we have, or even in team buildings. No? So that's a classic example of transfer information from one person to the endpoint of information. We can see there that there are noises and challenges we are facing in the transfer of information. But the moment when we use technology, cybernetics is already exposed the people. This is the process of feedback. The message and the meaning typically does not match up the intended message. The difference between the starting message and the end message can be reduced by control. Sometimes, mag-activity kita sang pass the message. The last person who received the message is actually not the same as clear as this message that was being sent from the first person. So there is a somehow a problem in the middle part, latter part of passing the message. Okay, so Shannon says every method of communication has its limits where is equal to the amount of information being transmitted and the amount of present. That's very true because we cannot control the noise happening. No? As I've said, this is inevitable and we just have to reduce the uncertainties about this one. The information must be repeated and reiterated without becoming boring to combat the noise. Therefore, to Shannon, communication is the applied science of maintaining an optimal balance between predictability and certainty. This mathematical theory of communication maintains many scientific standards of a good theory, and it also allows for humanistic standards. The theory explains its data and tests its hypothesis with formulas. The author identifies his hypothesis in describing a fundamental problem with communication as being produced at one point, either exactly or approximately a message selected at another point. No? I define his hypothesis as determinism in language. Okay, so to sum it up, cybernetics are very useful to the people nowadays. No? Even in today's time, no? They're using cybernetics. Even in a simple communication, like texting your friend, chatting your friend, cybernetics. Okay, so that's how important cybernetics is in our lives. Now, to apply this in a very serious and crucial form, cybernetics can be found in establishing modern intelligences or artificial intelligences or AIs. Sometimes the higher form of cybernetics is we can see that in talking to Google, no, or talking to Siri or talking to Alexa. So those are higher forms of cybernetics where computers are already communicating with other people. So that's the higher form, the end form technology for now. But I think more of this will come as generations begin to explore new things. So that's the reason why this principles of system thinking is very important to study. Later on in the next subjects that you have, I think principles of design of the 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 sequential learning or the spiral approach. You will be encountering more complex ideas about the cybernetics. Okay, so I think that's it for this afternoon. I hope you learned something today. Thank you very much for listening.